Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and a wonderful guest today staring at me on the Zoomcast, Anna Glynn, all the way from Melbourne. How good's this?
Sunny Melbourne.
What's that?
I said sunny Melbourne, but I'm joking because it's actually raining.
Well, I live in New Gisborne, so people listening to this, I live in New Gisborne in the Macedon Ranges, and as I look out, it is a beautiful overcast day. There has been sunshine, but not at the moment. But damn, we needed rain. I don't know about you, but my property has cracks the size of your thumb. It's incredible, incredible. So, hey, welcome to the podcast. Looking forward to having a conversation with you all about sales and sales leadership. You and I have been connected on LinkedIn for a little while now, and we are almost like kindred spirits. And I say that in terms of we're in the same sort of sphere working with sales leaders and organizations. And I think it's fair to say both on a mission to help sales leaders become even better at what they do and building engaging teams. So I'm going to love this conversation in terms of exploring your brand new book, which is called Strong. And it's all about how the best sales leaders engage, achieve, and thrive. So we're going to delve into that, not give too much away because we do want people to get a copy of the book. But for the people listening, you're also a speaker, obviously a brand new author, and also a coach facilitator. And I'd love for you to give us a bit of a background in terms of your experience and what's led you to this, because I know you're also qualified in positive psychology as well. So a lot of the work you do is based on psychology and research, which is phenomenal. But a bit of background in terms of what's led you to this, and specifically what led you to write the book.
Thank you. What an introduction. Well, I think if I go back to, Anna being a very, very young girl was probably when I first started in sales. So perhaps like some of the listeners, perhaps like you, Darren, on the side of the road selling the homemade goods to passers-by. I think that's probably my first reflection of being introduced to that wonderful world that is sales. And obviously fast forward to kind of, corporate days. And, I landed my first gig at one of the big banks here in Australia. And I was very fortunate to actually land in sales. And it really was that area that seemed to fit. I got there were like-minded people around, people that were similar to me, and they were doing great work. And I thought, wow, I can't believe this whole world out there exists. It was something that I wasn't taught about at uni or school. So since sort of that time, I've really always been in sales or customer facing roles to some extent. Where my curiosity stemmed from around, what leads to great sales teams was when, certainly when I was in my sales role and trying to get better, but probably more so when I was put into that position of leadership. And when I was suddenly responsible for driving team members to deliver results and also, be engaged and be well and all those other things that are suddenly your responsibility as the leader, that's really what sparked my curiosity about, well, what leads teams to be their best? Like, what is it that I need to do it as a leader practically, to get them to a 10 out of 10. So that's where it all started.
Love it. And as you make that transition, I know I reflect on my own story. I was a sales individual contributor and then was made a sales leader of exactly the same team. When you reflect on your journey, was that something you proactively sought in terms of a sales leadership role, or was it almost like bestowed upon you because you'd been such a great individual contributor and they thought, you know what, Anna's really great at sales. If we give her a leadership role, that means we're going to have maybe 8, 10, 12, 15 Annas. And how good is this business going to be? How was the experience for you? Because I know for many people, they find that transition quite challenging.
Exactly that. Like, you could have just said the words, they could have come straight from my mouth. So it was the same journey. So I was an individual contributor, was doing well, and I guess it was one of those sliding doors moments where my manager at the time was actually going overseas to pursue a different opportunity. And I remember getting the phone call and asking, oh, who's going to take over? And she said, you are. And I couldn't believe it. I was, what are you talking about me? I'm not ready. I'm not confident. I'm not capable. And she said, yeah, you are. Me and her boss at the time had agreed that I was ready.
Yep.
Now, I think there's a difference, or maybe they saw potential in me that I didn't quite realize at that point. But exactly as you said, I went, I took on that role not feeling confident and not feeling like I knew what were those practical steps that I had to take to actually lead my team to success. Like, what had I done? What had I done? But then how do I actually teach it to my team? So I felt really lost.
Yeah.
I really wanted a guidebook or a playbook to follow. I'd ask people around me, like, what do I do? And that's what started me actually doing that further study and trying to understand, if organizations and sales teams have existed for centuries, surely someone's figured out these secrets
Yeah.
by now, or hopefully they're not secrets. And despite the training that I'd been on and having some really great coaches and mentors around me, I still didn't feel like I had that capability. So that's what led me to do that further study and found that field called positive psychology.
Yeah, I love it. Isn't it funny? And I've loved your thoughts on this. My experiences, there's a lot of organizations out there that they almost think we've got these fantastic salespeople doing great work. And similar to you, they're almost asked or encouraged or voluntold to move into a sales leadership role, thinking that I guess the transition will be almost intuitive. And so they won't even skip a beat. But what they forget to give information around, and I guess mentoring and coaching, is there's a completely different set of skill sets that are required to run a sales team than it is to be a really good salesperson. So I'd love your experience, certainly in the first 90 days or so. How much did you have to almost stop yourself from jumping in and trying to close deals and being I guess the person doing the deals versus allowing the team to do that, and as part of it, maybe mistakes that were being made. So, love your experience on this, because my thought process is there's not many organizations that do this well. And maybe I'm wrong, or maybe it's just my frame of reference. But you mentioned a thing called a playbook. I'm not sure there are many playbooks out there. You've written one, which was fantastic. We're going to talk about it. But what was your experience in making that transition from that individual contributor into a sales leader, particularly in the first 90 days?
Well, I wish I could go back to that time. And now, with the knowledge that I have, I'm sure I would do things completely different. Because you're right, like I made mistakes. Even in some ways, the way that I was being influenced to lead was going against my own gut. And I was following it because that was what I was seeing around me, or being told this is the way to lead.
Yeah.
But for me, it didn't feel right. It didn't sit right. I didn't like the leader I was becoming as a result of that. So yes, I would love to go back and change time and be armed with the knowledge that I have now to be able to do things differently. But certainly through those mistakes and those uncomfortable feelings, I think that's probably where I made that decision to follow my gut and realize, no, there's got to be a different way. There's got to be a better way, because this isn't working for me and it's not working for the people around me. So yeah, again, like if only that playbook existed. This book is written for those groups of leaders, exactly as you're talking about. So the one that, you know, is great at sales, but they are also great at leading. And so maybe it is a reminder of some of the things they're already doing.
Hmm.
I think the second group, as you've called out, is great at sales, not sure how to lead, not great at leading. So they definitely need more guidance, or one that's about to become a leader as well. But also this book, when I talk about leadership, I talk about it from that perspective of it's not the position you're in, it's actually, the actions that you take. So it can be used by anyone, whether you're an individual contributor or a traditional leader as well. And I'm sure there's lots of people out there that, will think that they're good at all these things, but they're probably not. And maybe their teams will be, subtly giving them the book as well for certain supporters.
It's interesting you say that, because a lot of the programs that I run around leadership, I often share the fact that leadership can be quite positional, and if nothing else, if things are not going according to plan, at least as a baseline, you can come back to the fact that you're the manager, you're the leader, you're the supervisor. You can instruct people what to do based on positional power, but that doesn't engender trust and it certainly doesn't build a good culture. I often find that the most difficult form of leadership is when you are potentially an individual contributor or you have to manage expectations of different stakeholder groups or stakeholders where you have to use the power of influence,
Mm,
not your positional power. And that's where leadership really separates from the management component.
mm,
So it's interesting you say that this sort of book will not only provide a playbook for people who are individual contributors looking to increase their influence, which is also
mm,
leadership, but also for those who are looking to really ramp up I guess, their leadership powers in whatever role they have.
mm.
Um, so was there in your career, was there a pivotal moment, if you like, that almost became the genesis of this book? Because I know this is based on your experience, but also a lot of research you've done and your background in positive psychology. Was there something happened or a number of events that led you to think, you know what, if there ain't a playbook, I'm going to bloody well write one myself?
Well, I think it probably just stemmed from, those feelings of the way I'm leading isn't right and the way I'm being taught to lead isn't right. And for me, I've got a love of learning. I am very curious and I'm also very practical. So I didn't want to go reinvent the wheel and I didn't want to sort of learn another theory, leadership theory. I just wanted to know, like, what do I need to do tomorrow? And so when I uncovered this field of positive psychology, I started reading a book about it. And it really started to give me some of those answers to the questions that I had at the time around, well, what leads people to be engaged?
Hmm.
Spoiler alert, it's not the Friday night drinks or the fruit box, that we were led to believe for so long. What leads them to be resilient? Because obviously we have to be resilient in sales, but also, how do we get them to be motivated to achieve outcomes and ultimately, perform and achieve that long-term sustainable performance? So the field had the answers. It was already there. It's sitting within universities. It's sitting within journal articles, those really heavy, dry, articles that we get. And so the more I learned, I started to actually apply some of these things with my team. And I saw some really great results. So not just in terms of our scorecards and KPIs, but more about the way I was showing up, the way they were showing up, the relationships we had, how we were going about our work. So I became a little bit hooked. I was like, wow, I've already seen, quite a bit of change here, positive change. So I just wanted to learn more and more and as much as I can. And so I made that decision that I wanted to go and study the masters in the space
Yeah.
and then realized that I needed to teach these concepts to as many organizations as I could because it wasn't what was being taught at the time. And that is what brings me to be here today.
Man, so you saying that it wasn't all about the numbers, or it shouldn't be about all the numbers? Come on,
It's
Anna.
still all about the numbers. We're just changing the way we get there. That's what I say. We're always going to be focused on the results, but we're just changing the strategies we're using to actually get those outcomes and trying to stop things like burning out and toxicity and all those other unfortunate things that can happen within organizations.
It's interesting you mentioned before the ways to build engagement are not the Friday night drinks, although many organizations still, even in 2024, still roll out the drinks trolley 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, but no real consideration for corporate responsibility they have for their people, thinking that's going to motivate them to finish the week strongly or set up a brand new week next week, but also the other incentives that they throw, programs. It could be a cash award, it could be a trip away, whatever the case might be. Motivation is completely different for different people, and I'm sure you've found this out in relation to your studies on positive psychology. What's one of the things you discovered through that process that is is something that a lot of sales organizations don't necessarily focus enough attention on around motivation? What's sort of been discovery of what truly motivates people, do you think?
Mm. These are some of my greatest learnings. And exactly as you said, Darren, like not to dismiss the Friday night drinks or the social events. I say they're the icing on the cake. Like they are great and they have a role, but we've got to get the foundational elements right. So there's no point in having the icing if you don't actually have the cake base.
Yeah.
So we want the cake base. So when we look at an area like motivation, interestingly, all of us come with some psychological needs that actually help boost that motivation. So what organizations could be thinking about is how do we satisfy those needs? So one of the first ones is our need to belong. So again, coming back to the drinks idea, we often have those social events and that time in the office to
Yeah.
actually build those great connections. So we do feel supported, we feel valued, we offer support to others. So we create that belonging culture. So that's a really important part. And that helps motivate us because we become part of a team, part of a tribe, we're all in this together kind of mentality. So that's the first one. So there's that key need there. The second is all around our need to feel competent and masters in our roles. So we all have this need to continue to grow and develop. Now, that doesn't just mean going on formal training programs or, being supported to do, qualifications or degrees.
Yeah.
This can be, those informal things like giving people opportunities to role shadow others or have a coach or a mentor around or just be given regular in the moment feedback. These are all ways that we can actually, build our competence. The third element is all around autonomy. Now, in today's world, people think of autonomy as working away from the office. And that's one part of it, like that is. But again, when we talk with, organizations, not every role can be done away from the office.
That's
So
right.
certainly when I'm working with sales teams that are in retail environments, they have to be on the floor. That's
Yep.
how they do their job. So here we think about autonomy in perhaps, the way we do our work or the tasks we do or who we work with, or maybe it's flexibility in when you start or you end or break times. So that's where, autonomy comes in. And then the final element that I like to throw in these days is I'm a big believer that we all want meaning in our roles. And when we can find an organization where our own individual purpose aligns with the organization's mission, that's where we find meaning. And I think that's a huge motivator for people and a reason to kind of get out of bed and obviously put in that effort in their roles. So for me, motivation is summarized by those four key factors.
And it's interesting, not once did you mention making 250% a target, right? And the accolades that come with that. And yet many organizations lead with that sort of process, thinking that that's going to be the motivator. And I'm glad you said those things, because when it comes to trying to motivate sales people, first of all, I don't think we should be. We should be creating an environment where they are intrinsically motivated. But I often say to teams, and I'll ask this question of you as a sales leader: if you had those four things covered and you had meaning and fulfillment, all that sort of stuff, would you do that? Would you do what you do for nothing? Now, it's
Yes.
an interesting, and you say yes, right? Because we're on the same page. But it's amazing how many people you ask that question and said, "Are you stupid? Are you nuts? I wouldn't do this for nothing." Interesting. So what does that tell me about your engagement with, I guess, the organization, the purpose you've got? Do you know your values and so forth? Do you know what you stand for? Which we need to know as leaders in order to create the environment where our team can flourish and be, I guess, the best versions of themselves. So I'm so glad you mentioned those four things, because too many sales leaders lead with, I guess, the money or the extrinsic motivators they think are going to excite them, and therefore they think there's going to excite their team.
And look, there will be some people that are driven by money,
Yeah.
but money is probably just the commodity that helps them achieve other things, right? It's not just about the big checks. And money can be used as a strategy, but it's got a ceiling. Like it can't just continuously be used as the dangle, like the carrot, because it's got to stop somewhere. So it's not a long-term sustainable strategy at the end of the day. As you said, Darren, like I know people that have been offered big dollars to move, to go to other roles or organizations, and they've said no because they worry that they're not going to get those other elements where they move to.
Yeah.
So, you know, big dollars being put in front of them, and they've said, no, I love the group I work for. You can't replace that. I love the flexibility, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think organizations need to ask their people what thriving looks like to them, because it will be individual, and it will be unique to each of them, and
Yeah.
trying to create, that culture where they can meet those needs and help that team to thrive. I think you're definitely going to retain your best talent, and hopefully you're going to attract other people who want to join in on the good stuff as well.
Well, because you said one of the core, I guess, desires we have is the sense of belonging, which, as part of your book, you talk about the power of networks, right? And being clear on who you surround yourself with. I just wonder whether there's organizations out there that don't know how to quantify that sort of stuff. So they then default to the things that are more tangible and more visible. That is, I guess, the financial metrics. And they use that hopefully as an incentive for people to want to increase their discretionary effort, which I know from own experience being a salesperson and then trying to drive sales teams, it doesn't work. People don't get necessarily excited about a 10,000, 15,000, sometimes a 20,000 bonus or a trip to airways if they can't take their partner or their family, right? But companies continue to roll this stuff out time and time again. It's fascinating. So let's then delve into I guess the book itself, and it is a playbook, and I love the fact that it's called Strong, which for those listening stands for it's an acronym that stands for a few things. Now, if there was one element, well, we don't have to go through all of them. It's almost like saying pick your favorite child.
You just have. You just have.
If you didn't have to pick a favorite letter in the word strong, Anna, is there one that you think stands out above all else that if we just focused in on that, whilst it may not necessarily create the greatest ecosystem, it
Mm.
could actually help us make some progress towards becoming exceptional. So, um, out of STRONG, is there one that stands out that you like to chat about first?
For one, I'll answer this by using the two that basically talk to one concept.
Oh,
So
yeah.
the T stands for trust and psychological safety, and the N stands for networks. So talking about, how do you build those high quality connections with those around you? So what we know from the research, and again, what we intuitively know, is that um, our relationships are the biggest contributors to our well-being and our performance. So as a human being, we would not have survived if we tried to do it alone. So we need others for resilience, so to actually be able to survive. But what we know about our relationships is that they actually help us thrive as well.
Mm,
And that speaks volumes in the sales arena as well. So certainly there is the relationships that we have with our clients. Now, that's often the focus. You've got to have great relationships with your clients, obviously to get the business, get repeat business, referrals, etc. And so often that is a focus. But I think where we sometimes don't put enough emphasis is on the relationships around us. So your team, but then also your other stakeholders, and then even thinking about your industry networks as well. Now,
mm.
here we're not just talking about the quantity of relationships, we're talking about the quality. So you can have loads and loads of relationships, but if they're not of a high quality, they don't actually give you much.
Yeah.
So we want to actually be thinking about those relationships that are of a much higher quality where, they're reciprocal, people are getting energy from them, they're far from toxic, and they're a great support for you in the good times and the bad. So I think a lot of us will be used to, or sorry, I shouldn't say used to, but might be familiar with the idea of, when you've got what Netflix and Atlassian call the brilliant jerk. So when you've got that person on your sales team and they're great at delivering the numbers, but they are a culture killer. So they absolutely destruct relationships, and they have destroyed your culture so much so that people are basically abandoning ship.
Yeah.
And this is a really hard situation for leaders to be in, because they can see what that person is doing, but because they drive so much of the budget, it's really hard for them to let them go, even though deep down they know what they're doing. So, those two elements are very much focused in the book on how do we actually create these really great cultures that are made up of energizing people. They're people that are positive, they're optimistic, and because of that, they're of that high quality and they deliver all these really great outcomes to the individual, the team, and the organization.
It's interesting you talk about that. I've seen it happen a lot, and I've actually had experiences in my own sales leadership career where there was a person who was just phenomenal at being able to deliver the numbers, but as you described, they literally left a trail of destruction behind them. And this is why the importance of senior leadership is such a powerful thing within good businesses, where they look at that and they don't just look at the number. Because it's easy to say, oh, the numbers are looking good, the business is taken care of, we're going to have great profitability, et cetera, et cetera. But look 3 years down the track, and we're going to have no one left if we don't do something with this. Um, so let's talk about trust in terms of sales leadership and trying to build these cultures, because I know that trust doesn't come automatically with a title, despite what some people may believe. But in a sales leadership role, particularly in a situation where we do have, I guess, people who are performing at a high level but not a cultural fit, and we're sitting maybe trying to appease or communicate upwards to senior managers, but also keeping everybody aligned and hopefully inspired. How important is there any key tips around building that level of trust to make sure that we've got, I guess, for want of a better term, sustainability rather than super success? So what are some thoughts around that? Because I know that there are people listening to this who are dealing with stuff like this right now, that they're thinking, how do I deal with this? I can't have the conversation because the people above are saying, what's wrong? These numbers are getting delivered, so everything must be okay. And they'll say, Anna, deal with it. You deal with it. It's your role. That's why we pay you the big bucks as a sales leader. You deal with that, right? And you're sitting there thinking, "Well, really? Am I cut out for this? Help."
Yes, big help. So I think there's these two different ideas that have a role to play in these scenarios and certainly within teams. So trust being what exists between two individuals. So let's say the leader and one of their team members. So as you said, trust doesn't just come from the position you're in. It's all about action, and obviously doing what you say you're going to do is a way to build trust. There's lots of other ways you can build trust, but one of the ways that it quickly backfires is by doing the opposite of not doing what you say you're going to do. And again, I think we've all got scenarios where that has occurred. When we start to talk about the cultural pieces, I think what's really clear is that we need to have psychological safety present. So that is where we feel that we can speak up, voice our opinions, offer ideas that might go against the grain without any fear of a negative repercussion, which might be being judged, or it might be seen as a career limiting move, or suddenly people think differently of you because you have spoken up in that way. So psychological safety is actually something that exists within the culture, and it is where we feel safe to be able to voice those opinions and share ideas and give feedback, whether it's positive or constructive.
Mm.
So if you're in an environment where you don't think you can speak up when there is an individual that might be acting in a brilliant jerk way, then that's probably a suggestion that the psychological safety isn't there and that the trust isn't there with the leader either as well.
Yeah. And then with that, how important is it? This is a loaded question because I know the answer to this. How important is it to then set not only the right standards, but also have the right values that we have as a sales team, that everybody then is, I guess, measured by the same standard and there's consistency around that?
Yeah. So super important and loaded a question, because again, I think it comes back to that idea that if the person is delivering, I've seen scenarios where it doesn't matter about the values. So that is where, again, you question, well, are these values actually being lived by, and how are we holding people kind of to account to them?
Mm.
The the behaviors and the the values that we want people to adopt need to come from leadership, and we need to hold people to account to that, regardless of how they're performing. I think the other thing that we need to start to get better at is probably rewarding the good behavior.
Yeah.
So coming back to that idea of, the psychological safety piece, rather than judging people that might share these opinions or offer feedback, let's actually create an environment where we reward them. So reward them for speaking up, showing vulnerability, admitting to their mistakes, not like covering them up.
Yeah.
Because when we have those sorts of cultures, they're a learning culture. And this is really important in sales, particularly because there are lots of knockbacks and setbacks. But if we adopt, that growth mindset that we've heard lots about, that's where we see those hurdles as those opportunities to grow and to develop. The mistakes are seen as, ways to do things better and perhaps in new ways going forward. So again, I think that ties back to that idea of rewarding those behaviors that we actually want the rest of the team to follow.
Which means that we as a leader have to create a feedback culture. Now, it's a cliche, I know, but I love saying it anyway, and that is feedback is the breakfast of champions. And we need to create, and you said it, catching people doing good things and rewarding them for that. And it doesn't have to be anything tangible. It could just be positive reinforcement in a public space. All right. You've done a fantastic job specifically based on this behavior. Keep doing it. I'm staggered at the number of salespeople, though, that say to me, Darren, the feedback I get comes from either my quarterly or 6 monthly formalized review. And my sales leader is so busy navel gazing, working on strategy or working on the numbers, they literally turn around to me and say, well, if I'm not having a conversation with you, you're doing a good job. That is nuts.
Mm. And let's go back to that earlier point. Like, we know results and performance is ultimately the number one in every organization. So if it is so important to you, why are the discussions about it happening once a quarter, once a year? Like, that's mind-boggling, right? Because it should be happening every day because it's that important.
Yeah.
I think we need to, in some ways, yes, obviously respect, those more formal catch-ups, but I think we want to introduce that idea of the learning culture where feedback's just a regular, it's just a given, both positive and constructive, and stop putting so many formalities around how you need to deliver it and how you say it and how it will be received. I think if we have those true learning cultures, it's an everyday in the moment, up, down, across organizations.
Yeah.
I think, well, because of a lot of, influences outside of our control, like the negativity bias and even the way that our organizations influence us, is we do focus on the constructive and the negative. And it's unfortunate because, yes, to some extent that can help us improve. But what, again, we know from the research is that when we actually play to our strengths and what we're good at, we can achieve much more. But we don't put enough focus on that. We don't tell people what they're great at. We don't remind them or reward them on all the good stuff that they're doing. We just dwell on often the mistakes that they've made or where they've mucked up. So there does need to be this mindset shift to actually put more weight actually on the positive, and don't believe that it's just a given. As humans, we actually want to hear it and we want to celebrate success as well.
Oh, absolutely. And particularly in a sales environment, there are too many organizations, and I'm sure you've experienced it, I have, where you're almost on eggshells coming back to the office because you've promised or at least forecast that this particular deal is going to happen. And for whatever reason, it doesn't or has been delayed. And you're beside yourself on how am I going to explain this to my sales leader because I promised that I was going to deliver this and it's not going to happen. Because there's this almost unwritten ground rule that success equals getting the deal and failure is not an option. And if you make a mistake or don't get the deal, then you are a quote unquote failure. And I think as sales leaders, we've got a lot to learn from this, but we've also got a lot of responsibility to say, well, are we making progress? Are we focusing on the activities that we want to see play out? And are we continuing to provide that positive reinforcing, I guess, for many people, the confirmation that you're on the right track, doing the right things, that eventually the results will come. You just got to stay in the game. And that's why it's such an important thing to create that level of psychological safety. but also figure out, am I putting the right people in the right positions, playing to their strengths? And am I maintaining as a leader a level of optimism, which then gives permission to the team to go out and go beyond their comfort zone? Because sales is, yes, it's a numbers game, and sales is not every single person's going to say yes to you. You're going to have more no's than yeses. We know that, right? But as a sales leader, how are we creating an environment where it's okay to get a no? It's okay to then come back and say, hey, I didn't get this. This is where it's at. Can you help me? Right? What's
Mm.
missing? That's
Yeah.
feedback. That, and if you got that thought process, people are going to be more open to, I guess, sharing their innermost feelings and thoughts. What do you say to that?
Oh, couldn't agree more. And that's it. And the studies around psychological safety, one of the best examples is from Google called Project Aristotle, where they were trying to identify what led to these high performing teams. And they looked at, gender and experience and skills and capabilities and a whole range of different demographics, and much more. And what it came down to at the end was actually the teams that had greater psychological safety. And the way that they could see that was, it was the teams where more voices were heard, everyone had different opinions, they were able to share and admit to mistakes, etc. So I think those sorts of case studies coming out are great because they actually substantiate that idea that we do need to, make mistakes and learn from them. There's also some incredible case studies that have come out of hospitals. What I say to groups is that, psychological safety is also needed for things like creativity and innovation.
Yeah.
So it can actually be what causes you to stand out from your competitors by perhaps being more innovative with your products or more creative with your solutions when this is present, because you're actually asking people to expand and to grow on what your current offerings are. So it actually does lead to that longer term success by helping you actually differentiate yourself from others around you.
Love it. And with that, what do you say to leaders who find themselves in a predicament where they build a team, but they build a team of people who are very similar to them?
No, no one would do that, surely. It's very interesting because, of course, you can go into organizations and you can see teams that are just clones. And I had a very good conversation about that from a diversity discussion recently with a group where I challenged the leader around who was your last hire? Is it someone that looks like you, sounds like you, does everything the same as you? And that's an unconscious bias that we all have. So again, it
Yeah.
takes, a lot of effort to be able to overcome that. But if I'm a leader and I'm actually trying to create a team that is going to perform over the long term, it shouldn't look like me. Again, if I'm playing to my strengths, I'm going to have people on my team that can cover my gaps and my weaknesses. So they should already look different from that perspective. I should also have a team that is full of people that have different strengths and weaknesses. So again, they're covering all bases. So
Mm.
if I'm truly doing that, I want to create that thriving team. Creating a clone team is definitely not the way to do it. But we need to challenge ourselves, perhaps, in small steps around that. So yeah, who are we listening to? Who are we seeking opinions from? Can we challenge ourselves, even if we think about who we're following on social media?
Yeah.
How can we broaden our thoughts so we can try and start to overcome some of those biases that we have?
Yeah, because sometimes we might think that the way that we create a psychologically safe environment is to surround ourselves with people who are just like us, which almost gives a false sense of, I guess, a perception of reality that potentially then leads to a thing called groupthink. It's such an important thing that as a leader, know what your strengths are, but know where your gaps are, and bring in people who have strengths in your gaps to complement you, to have people with diverse thinking, diverse experiences, diverse values, even that you can actually get them in alignment around some sort of common goal, but encouraging them to have a voice and to share that on a regular basis. Which leads me to the next part in terms of the network that you surround yourself with. And people listening to this would have heard the old adage that, you're the sum of the five people closest to you, et cetera, et cetera. Be very careful who you surround yourself with. What's your take then on, because one of the things you talk about in the book is creating and fostering a high quality network. Because you mentioned earlier, one thing is to have a quantity of friends, because hey, I've got 100,000 followers on LinkedIn. How good am I? Blah, blah, blah. But how many of them do you know, right? So it's quantity versus quality, particularly in the role of a sales leader. How important is it? And maybe it's a little bit more of a loaded question, but you can just talk a little bit about I guess, the importance of really being selective in terms of who you have in your circle.
Mm. Well, I think for all the reasons we've already spoken about, that's why we need it, is to challenge our own selves around, yeah, what do we know, and what are our experiences and what shaped us, because there are different voices out there that do need to be heard. Um, if we, want to create that thriving culture, it needs to have different inputs in it. The way we're going about things is certainly not going to set us up for success if we keep doing what we're doing. So I think we do need to, challenge ourselves to bring in different experiences, different cultures, different genders, different, qualifications, to really get a really good understanding of the way that things could be done and could be better. We've got to get a bit more curious about that. So yeah, I think we've got to find those networks, whether they're in our existing teams or certainly whether they're internal to the organization, or more likely probably going to be external. But yeah, where can we start with that, and where can we try and find those people that might offer us something that might make us feel uncomfortable or might go against the way that we've done things before. But that's probably a good thing, because it's probably suggesting it's something that we might need to explore a little bit further.
It is. As you're talking, it reminds me of the Johari window, which a lot of people find quite challenging. That we all have blind spots, but what gets really confronting is what are the blind spots that either I don't know or my colleagues don't know, that it becomes unknown. It's like, well, that's completely outside of your comfort zone as well,
Mm.
because we all are attracted to people who remind us similar to us. So it's the law of likability. But how can we become more intentional of aligning ourselves and putting ourselves in an environment that stretches us and gets us out of our comfort zone? So you going into, for example, doing a master's of positive psychology, how did that not so much transpire, but how much of a threshold did you have to jump over in terms of, that wasn't your world, but now it is your world? What were some of the challenges that you had to sort of grapple with even mentally to I guess, first of all survive in that environment, but then thrive?
Well, I think the first one, which, is a really simple concept, and we've already mentioned it, is this idea of playing to strengths. So, we hear it a lot on the sports ovals or sports fields, play to your strengths, play to your strengths. But when I think about it from the workplace perspective, certainly back in those days when I was studying, I wasn't seeing it actually come to life. I wasn't part of a system where we were truly adopting that philosophy. So, there's a few reasons for it. Like, it's not our fault as to why we're not doing it. The
Mm.
first is that negativity bias. So I mentioned it earlier, but this is ingrained within us, and it was a survival mechanism. It doesn't do a lot for us anymore. Unfortunately, what it does do is it encourages us to focus on what's wrong with us and what's wrong with our world around us, or what we don't have.
Yeah.
So we are already inclined to look at our gaps. So, it's much easier for us to put up our hands and say, hey, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at this, versus standing up and confidently saying, hey, I'm really great at this. We don't feel that comfortable doing it. So that's the first thing that gets in the way. I think the second is we are part of a system that also wants us to focus on our weaknesses. So if we think about, the organizational environment, again, like we spoke about, performance conversations, even the templates you fill out about people, there is a lot more weight given to what people are doing wrong, as opposed to what they're doing right. And even when we build strategies and team plans, again, it's like, oh, where are we not doing well? Let's go and fix that. As opposed to, where are we doing well? Let's continue to build that and forget about that stuff that we're not so good at, as long as we
Mm.
can. So the systems, from that perspective, also encourage us to focus on our weaknesses. Even if we think about like our schools, they want us to be all rounders, like, be good at everything, try and, focus on the lot, as opposed to, hey, you're really good at this, keep trying at that. So I think there's that system element. The third hurdle that gets in the way, I believe, is an Australian perhaps specific thing, but it's that tall poppy syndrome. Because again, I think we don't want to be seen as being great or, you know, too big for our boots by walking around and saying, yeah, these are my strengths. This is what I'm really great at. Like, we're part of cultures. It's like, no, let's just talk about what I'm really bad at as well. So I think to some extent that gets in the way. So what I learned in my studies was, you know, playing to strengths, truly understanding what you're good at, what gives you energy, and what can you use a lot in your role, and focusing on that for 80%, and then a 20% focus on your weaknesses or your gaps. Even better still, when you're a leader, get someone else to manage those weaknesses for you and make you look even better. So I learned that, but I hadn't seen it play out in reality. So that was a big takeaway for me, was actually the way we are approaching things and our mindset within organizations is not adopting this strategy.
Yeah.
The best thing that I learned about it is that playing to your weaknesses will only get you to average performance.
Yeah.
Playing to your strengths will help you exceed performance. So it's a much, much smarter strategy, but also much more difficult to adopt.
Yeah, and you look at elite sports, for example, you know, whether it be pro golfers or tennis players or whatever, they always play to their strengths. They've still got coaches
Yeah.
that will not so much improve their weaknesses and turn them into a strength, but they might minimize the exposure to the weakness. So they'll have strategies that they'll enable them to play to their strengths, because that's where the money is, that's where the success is, that's where the
Yeah.
differentiation is.
Yeah.
So then if you translate that from I guess an internal thing or a self-focused thing now to, okay, I'm running a sales team and I've got maybe 5 people, I've got 10 people in the sales team. How do I identify the strengths, and how do I, Anna, as a sales leader, give people the opportunity in my team to play to the strengths where we all have a target? And at the end of the day, the business looks at that target, and whether you've hit it or not will determine whether it's success or not. Are there any thoughts or any strategies or tactics that me as a sales leader can focus on to help encourage my team members to really take advantage of the strengths that they have?
Hmm. So the first point of your question around kind of how do we learn what they are, like, there are tools out there, but I always say to groups, like, you don't have to go and do a tool or a survey to find out what they are. Just simply by exploring, like, what brings on flow for you, what energizes you, like, what are you doing in your role when time just simply disappears? That's a really good way to start to identify what are your strengths. Because when you're in those flow moments, you're at your most engaged and you're performing at your best. So that is suggesting to us that you are challenged, but you're also able to meet those challenges by using your strengths. So asking those sorts of questions of people, like what lights you up, what energizes you, when are you at your best, when are you in flow, will start to divulge some of those things. Asking the opposite of those questions, you're probably going to uncover what are their weaknesses, or what are the things that they're good at doing, but they
Yeah.
actually don't enjoy doing at all. Like, they're a big drainer for them.
Yeah.
So that's the first part, is like, there's definitely ways that you can uncover them. The second part is then obviously about the use and how do you actually apply them in your role. And as you said, like, when we've got this target, what do I do as a team to set them up so they play to their strengths? There's an idea out there called job crafting. So this is where you actually think about the roles and the responsibilities within the team, because yes, although we're all after the one goal, there will be some nuances in terms of what task we need to do to get there. We can all be focused on the same outcome, but there might just be different avenues or different strengths that we use to actually get that outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, as an example, you know, some people might be very much in the detail. And so they're on the technical and they know the ins and outs of everything, and they love getting curious and learning new things. So you want them kind of doing all the research on competitors or new offers or new technology advances and those sorts of things. And then you might have someone else that is just the relationship person. Like, they just love getting into the deep. They lead with empathy. They're really great listeners. They build those great relationships. So again, like, you're all still getting the same outcomes. You're probably just using different things to get there. And that's the way that you can play to the strengths, is by uncovering those and working out, Where are there ways that I can perhaps move responsibilities around so everyone is able to leverage their strengths?
Mm. Which means that as a sales leader, you need to know your people pretty well.
You do. And a great way to build trust and get to know them is by uncovering what their strengths are. I often say to leaders, when was the last time you called out your team member when you've noticed a strength of theirs? Again, talking about that learning culture, that feedback, like how lovely would it be if you had your boss saying, "Hey, I noticed this about you. This must be a strength of yours."
Yeah,
It can transform relationships.
absolutely. Bit of hit of dopamine never goes astray.
Absolutely.
That is fantastic. Hey, this has been a great conversation. If there was a couple of lasting thoughts that we could leave sales leaders with that can help them in their quest to become exceptional and thrive and build a highly engaged sales team, um, either around strong in terms of the methodology or your own experience and thought process, what would that or those be?
I think my biggest learning has been that there's a lot of emphasis put on the sales skills. So your 101, your negotiation, your persuasion, your influencing, your listening skills, prospect building, you name it. Like we've done it. There's a lot of focus on the skills that you need to be good at sales. But what I've certainly uncovered in my own research is that the skills alone won't get you to success. It's actually building what I call these off-field elements. So do you have the mindset? So a mindset that is optimistic. And do
Yeah.
you have the tool set? So things like a high quality network, resilience, playing to your strengths that actually help you not only survive, but thrive in the sales world. So for too long, there's been that gap where we focus on skills when really we need to be looking at the off field. And when we focus there, our teams are at their best when they are on field as well. By doing that, like we set up teams that are engaged and they achieve and they thrive. And you get great salespeople, but at the end of the day, you actually get better humans too. And I think that's one of the best things. If we can teach them that, how to be, better all round, it's going to do, much more.
That's a very novel concept, Anna. Better human beings.
Who would have thought?
Who would have thought that a salesperson and a great salesperson can actually be a good human as well?
Hmm. Well, I'm a big believer. And if you ask people, who are their best sales leaders, they're probably going to talk a lot about not what they've done in sales, probably things that they're doing outside of that sales arena.
And it's a great way to end because I often ask sales leaders, what would they want to be known for when they leave, right? So when people are doing, and take it to the end of their life, and what's going to be on their epitaph, and how do they want to be remembered? Very few of them turn around and say, "I want to be remembered as the number one sales leader in this company." Most of them say something like, "I want to be remembered and known for being a high quality person who cared, who created a great environment where people could get better and thrive," and all those things that are very hard to measure, but are almost not considered to be the hard and fast salesy type responses that most people would expect. So I think it's a great way to finish that as a sales leader, if we can become great humans or better humans and still build that level of connection, and if we really, really care, then amazing things are going to happen. Amazing things are going to happen. So,
Absolutely.
hey, thanks for jumping on the podcast. It's been a phenomenal conversation. Now, where can people, first of all, learn more about yourself? Where do they connect? But more importantly, with his brand new book, for those looking on YouTube, I'm holding up the book strong. Just got my hands on the hot off the press coffee here. Where can they get a copy of the book?
So you can get a copy of the book from my website, which is annaglynn.com.au. Alternatively, you can go to the online retailers, here and around the world, like Amazon, etc., and purchase a copy. And also, I'd love to connect with people on LinkedIn, which is where I regularly share sort of tips and tricks from this space. So you can find me, via my name, Anna Glynn.
Brilliant. And an absolute pleasure talking to another phenomenal sales leader in the industry. Keep doing the great work that you're doing. And I reckon there may have to be a follow-up episode to this one. What do you think?
More than happy. I'd love that.
Awesome. Thanks for joining me on the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast.
Thanks, Darren.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.